It's my birthday! Woo! Or at least it will be when this thing goes up, because I'm recording this a few weeks ahead. But if you're looking for the purest expression of childhood joy in late 20th century America, you could do far worse than to stand in the middle of a West Coast Chuck E. Cheese sometime around 1994 and simply listen. The air hummed with arcade jingles that looped like pop songs from another planet, laughter ricocheting off low ceilings, ticket dispensers rattling like tiny printing presses, and the faint mechanical breathing of animatronic animals preparing to sing. Somewhere behind it all was the steady percussion of sneaker soles on patterned carpet, the clink of tokens being counted in small hands, and the occasional triumphant shout when a game finally paid out a glorious ribbon of tickets. This was the place you went to celebrate. It wasn't like a regular fast food joint like Pizza Hut or Wendy's. It was far more special. For my brother and I, it was for birthdays, or if we got a B+ or higher on our report cards. We'd come in, tell our mom, she'd declare, "I'm so proud of you, honey." And in less than a beat, she'd tell us we'd be getting a trip to Chuck E. Cheese this Friday night. Oh man! No words can possibly describe that unique sense of excitement. Because if the 1990s had a cathedral for children, it was not made of stained glass, but of plastic tubes, glowing screens, and the warm, yeasty smell of pizza drifting from the kitchen. A kid could walk in ordinary and walk out convinced they had spent an afternoon in a place where every sound, color, and rule existed for their benefit. In that decade, the chain reached a cultural sweet spot. Old enough to be established, new enough to feel magical, and perfectly calibrated to the tastes of kids who believed a birthday party could be measured in tokens, slices, and the number of times a parent agreed to say, "Okay, one more game." The story had begun on the West Coast itself, when the first location opened in San Jose in 1977 as Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater, the brainchild of Atari founder Nolan Bushnell, who believed arcades should be for families rather than pool hall regulars. He had taken the raw electricity of early video games and tried to give it a friendlier address, a place where a child could stand at a cabinet without being jostled by adults, and where the prize for showing up was not just a score, but a full afternoon of sanctioned excitement. By the 1990s, that experiment had matured into a full-blown phenomenon. What started as an audacious blend of pizza parlor, arcade, and stage show had become a ritual location in West Coast childhood, as recognizable as a school playground or a shopping mall food court. After corporate mergers, lawsuits, rebrandings, and the grand concept unification that transformed rival showbiz pizza locations into Chuck E. Cheese restaurants, the name had become nearly universal, the kind of brand that could be understood by a child who could not yet read it. By 1994, the branding simplified to Chuck E. Cheese's, and the mouse himself traded his formal vest and derby hat for a baseball cap and sneakers, a wardrobe change that perfectly symbolized the decade's casual optimism. The updated look suggested a mascot who might skateboard, play a game console, or high-five you without a hint of formality, which mattered in an era when kids were beginning to expect entertainment to speak their language. Children didn't analyze corporate history, of course, and they certainly did not debate ownership structures or licensing strategies while tugging at their parents' sleeves for more tokens. But they sensed instinctively that this was a place designed for them rather than their parents, and that distinction mattered enormously. It was a rare environment where adults seemed slightly off balance, forced to navigate a world of blinking lights and shrieking joy, while kids moved through it like natural citizens. A typical West Coast location in the 1990s occupied a strip mall corner or a standalone building with a cheerful sign visible from the parking lot promising pizza, games, and noise in roughly equal measure. On the outside, it could look almost modest, like any other family restaurant wedged between a grocery store and a craft shop. But stepping through the doors felt like entering a different climate. Inside, the layout followed a recognizable geography, as if every restaurant had been mapped according to childhood priorities. Tables clustered near the stage for birthday parties and family meals, arranged so adults could pretend they were in charge while keeping one eye on the chaos. The arcade stretched out like a miniature carnival midway, the machines calling out in bright colors and synthetic melodies that layered into a kind of electronic weather. Somewhere beyond it all lurked the play structures, ball pits, crawl tubes, slides, and mazes that seemed engineered by someone who had studied both playground design and dream logic, then decided to remove the parts that made sense to adults. Children climbed into these structures with the seriousness of explorers, disappearing into plastic tunnels and reappearing in unexpected places, flushed with the pride of having navigated a world built at their scale. The ball pits in particular achieved near mythic status among children, who dove into them with heroic commitment despite the fact that adults quietly regarded them as biological experiments in progress and watched with a mixture of affection and dread. To a kid, however, they were treasure seas of plastic color, places where gravity felt optional and where the rules of everyday cleanliness did not apply. Even the carpet underfoot played its part, patterned in busy swirls and neon shapes that seemed designed to hide spilled soda, scattered tickets, and the occasional abandoned token, as if the building itself understood that mess was not a side effect of fun, but one of its essential ingredients. Prices, by adult standards, were modest but strategically arranged to encourage celebration. Admission itself was usually free. The real economy ran on tokens, and the token was a small, shining promise that something fun would happen the moment it hit the slot. A handful of dollars could buy a paper cup of brass coins stamped with the restaurant's logo, the kind of cup a child carried with both hands as if it contained treasure. Parents often discovered that the easiest way to keep the piece was to surrender early, buy the token bundle, and accept that the afternoon's budget would be measured in metallic clinks rather than sensible receipts. Birthday packages sweetened the deal by bundling pizza, pitchers of soda, party hats, slices of cake, and a preset allotment of game credits into a single number that sounded reasonable when said quickly. The language around those packages was always optimistic, as though worth it for the memories were a measurable unit, like ounces or inches, rather than an emotional leap of faith. Individual arcade games often cost 1 or 2 tokens, which meant a $5 purchase could feel like a fortune or vanish in minutes, depending on whether the child in question favored skee-ball patience or racing game recklessness. Some kids developed elaborate strategies, circling the game room first, like generals surveying a battlefield, testing buttons, watching other players, and saving their tokens for the machines most likely to deliver tickets. Others treated the tokens like confetti, flinging them into whatever cabinet made the loudest noises. The cost structure was sneaky in its brilliance, cheap enough to feel accessible, expensive enough to ensure a steady tide of just one more purchases. Every so often, a parent would do the mental math and realize that a small pile of tokens had turned into an alarming sum, but by then the children were already mid-laugh, mid-run, mid-life, and it felt churlish to interrupt that momentum with a lecture on fiscal responsibility. The prize counter completed the system like a glittering bank. It displayed rewards ranging from tiny candies and plastic finger traps to stuffed animals and electronics perched on high shelves like luxury goods. The most coveted prizes always seemed to be located just out of reach, both physically and mathematically. And the counter was staffed by an employee with the calm demeanor of someone who had explained, "No, you're 50 tickets short 1,000 times before lunch." The arithmetic of tickets to prizes formed an early lesson in economics. Thousands of tickets might be required for anything impressive, yet children guarded their paper strips as if they were bearer bonds. Tickets were counted, recounted, folded carefully, and sometimes hidden in pockets with the seriousness of a secret mission. A child who had saved for weeks carried those tickets with the pride of a collector, while a child who spent them immediately still left with something small and triumphant, because the entire point was proof that the games had mattered. The food itself occupied a curious place in the legend. Pizza was the centerpiece, chosen originally because it could be prepared in batches without complicated timing. And in the 1990s, it arrived on plastic trays cut into generous slices designed for sharing. The slices were meant to be eaten quickly, often between games, with hands that still smelled faintly of tokens and joystick buttons. The taste, according to adults, ranged from perfectly acceptable to enthusiastically average, but to children, it tasted like victory, or at least like permission to keep playing. The pizza was less a culinary event than a ritual intermission. The moment when kids returned to the table in a sweaty, ecstatic wave, drank too much soda too fast, and then bolted back toward the arcade before anyone could suggest a salad. And yet there were options beyond pizza, because parents, unlike children, occasionally required variety. The menu often included sandwiches, wings, access to a salad bar, and desserts that leaned heavily into the idea that frosting was a food group. Some locations served beer, a detail that delighted parents who needed courage to face the noise level and confused children who could not imagine why anyone would order something that wasn't neon colored. The drinks came in bright cups, sometimes topped with collectible character lids that children treated as trophies, and the cups had a habit of following families home and lingering for years in kitchen cabinets. The culinary point was never refinement. It was fuel for play, and it was engineered for speed. Big flavors, easy chewing, minimal interruption to the main attraction. What truly defined the experience, though, was the entertainment. From the beginning, the restaurants had combined arcade games with animated shows, pioneering what later became known as the Family Entertainment Center. In the 1990s, most locations still featured animatronic stage productions, technological marvels to young eyes, and slightly uncanny miracles to adults. The stage sat like a tiny theater at the edge of the dining area, framed by lights and speakers, a place where mechanical performers waited behind curtains or fixed smiles. When the show started, children drifted toward it as if drawn by gravity. Bands of robotic characters performed songs, jokes, and skits on rotating stages, their movements powered by in-house systems once known as cyberamics. Arms lifted, heads turned, eyelids blinked, and mouths opened in time with music that sounded both catchy and faintly synthetic, like a pop song filtered through a carnival. The main ensemble, Chuck E. Cheese and Munch's Make-Believe Band, included Helen Henny, Mr. Munch, Jasper T. Jowls, and Pasquale the drummer, each with distinct personalities that children discussed with the seriousness of theater critics. Kids argued about which character was funniest, which one looked coolest, which one had the best songs, and whether Mr. Munch looked like he could eat an entire pizza in one bite. The show's scripts were corny in the way children adored and adults tolerated, full of cheerful puns and earnest lessons about friendship. I mean, yes, with cynical adults' eyes, they do look very uncanny today, and you can see why they've been parodied in cartoons and movies, and ultimately turned into violent, murderous monsters in Five Nights at Freddy's. But when you're a little kid, they would always get you clapping and giggling like an idiot, and we loved it. Some restaurants had multi-stage setups inherited from earlier showbiz pizza venues, with performers spread across separate platforms so that the show felt sprawling and grand. Others experimented with newer formats that blended animatronics with video screens and lighting effects, making the stage look like a small concert venue designed by someone who believed neon was a moral good. The technology sometimes whirred, blinked, or paused in ways that made adults chuckle, but to kids, it felt like meeting celebrities. The kind you could watch up close without needing a ticket to a real arena. The arcade floor formed the second half of the spectacle, and for many children, it was the real heart of the place. Cabinets lined the walls, and islands of machines filled the center, flashing with pixelated color and beckoning music. The room had its own weather, bursts of sound, sudden cheers, the occasional wail of a child who had lost a game, and the constant background rhythm of coins and tickets. Redemption games dispensed tickets in glorious streams, the paper curling out like celebratory ribbon. Racing games let kids grip plastic steering wheels with dramatic intensity, leaning into turns as if the carpet were actually a highway. Fighting games gathered clusters of onlookers, older kids hovering nearby with the confidence of those who knew secret combos. Shooters offered plastic guns that fired light at targets, and the best players performed with the concentration of professional athletes. Tokens clinked into slots with satisfying finality. That small sound, repeated hundreds of times across a busy afternoon, became the unofficial soundtrack of the decade's birthday parties. Victory produced not only points, but noise, lights, and occasionally a small crowd of impressed onlookers, because few things earned admiration faster than a kid who could rack up tickets without wasting tokens. The atmosphere resembled a miniature Las Vegas designed by a kindergarten teacher, a place some jokingly called a child casino. Though the house always won in the end because tokens inevitably ran out. Even so, children left feeling rich in the only currency that mattered there, sticky-fingered happiness, a small bag of prizes, and the certainty that for a few hours the world had been built entirely for them. Themes varied from location to location, especially on the West Coast, where competition and creativity pushed managers to add local flair, and where neighborhoods themselves seemed to demand a little personality. A store tucked beside a sun-baked Southern California strip mall might lean hard into bright carnival palettes, all primary colors and high-energy signage that looked like it had been designed to catch the eye of a passing minivan. Another location, perhaps nearer a tech corridor or a newer development, might embrace space-age neon with starbursts, glowing trim, and that distinctly 1990s confidence that the future should be loud, shiny, and slightly fluorescent. Others drifted toward jungle motifs, complete with leafy murals and cartoon animals, or toward an urban city vibe where the stage backdrops resembled miniature skylines and the walls suggested a playful downtown built for a mouse and his band. The design philosophy favored abundance over subtlety, in the way a kid's imagination does. Walls might feature murals that wrapped around corners, stages might resemble cityscapes or themed sets, and carpet patterns often looked as if they had been borrowed from a roller rink, a bowling alley, or a dream someone had after eating too much birthday cake. Lights blinked, screens flashed, and even the ticket counter felt like a tiny department store devoted to plastic treasures. The result was not elegant, but exuberant, a deliberate sensory overload that made the outside world seem a little quieter by comparison. Children rarely noticed decor details consciously, yet they remembered the feeling decades later with startling clarity. The warmth of the room packed with noise, the way the colors seemed to vibrate, the sense that every corner promised another surprise if they turned their head fast enough. Birthday parties were the institution's highest ritual, equal parts celebration and controlled mayhem. Reserved tables came with hats, plates, candles, and the kind of paper goods that felt official, simply because they carried the restaurant's logo. There was usually a brief moment of calm. When families arrived, parents arranging gifts and coaxing toddlers into seats, older kids already twisting in place because they could hear the arcade calling from across the room. Then the ceremony began. A staff member might appear like a ringmaster, guiding the group through the party schedule with practiced cheer, and at the peak of it all came the arrival of Chucky himself in costumed form. He would dance, wave, and pose for photographs while parents aimed camcorders, trying to capture a moving subject in low light while also keeping an eye on cups of soda perched too close to the table edge. The birthday child received a medallion or crown, a tiny symbol of sovereignty, and for a few minutes they were treated like the star of the entire building. The cake appeared, the candles flared, and the room became a chorus of off-key singing that sounded, to the kids, like a stadium crowd. Sometimes the animatronic band might dedicate a song, or the stage show would align just perfectly with the party's timing, making it feel as though the mechanical performers were personally in on the celebration. After that, the structured portion dissolved into the true purpose of the place, a swarm of children scattering to the games, returning only when summoned for pizza, then disappearing again before the last slice had cooled. For many West Coast families, hosting a party there signaled that one had truly arrived in childhood society. Invitations to such events were coveted documents, passed around schoolyards like concert tickets, studied for the address and time, and sometimes even compared with other invitations to see which location was the good one. By the late 1990s, the chain's corporate identity had stabilized under CEC Entertainment, and its cultural footprint stretched across most American states and into multiple countries, making it both familiar and strangely reassuring to traveling families. Yet the West Coast retained a special relationship with the brand because that was where it had begun, and where many of its innovations were tested, refined, and occasionally debated by devoted fans long before most children knew the word brand. California locations, for example, often debuted new stage concepts or updated character designs before they spread elsewhere, which meant a kid in one city might swear their Chucky looked cooler, sounded funnier, or had the best show compared with a cousin's location a few hours away. The region's long history with arcade culture gave these restaurants an extra spark, too, as if the machines and blinking cabinets were part of a larger West Coast tradition of games, amusements, and tech-driven fun. To a child in Los Angeles, San Jose, San Diego, or the East Bay, visiting Chuck E. Cheese did not feel like participating in a national chain. It felt like visiting a hometown institution that happened to exist everywhere. A place as normal and necessary as a park, but with better prizes and more pizza. Looking back, the decade stands out as a golden era, not because everything was objectively better, but because all the elements aligned in a very particular way. Arcades were still culturally dominant, not yet replaced by home consoles and online play as the unquestioned center of kids' gaming lives. Animatronics still seemed futuristic rather than quaint. occupying that sweet spot where robotics felt magical instead of dated, and where the stage show could be both funny and slightly spooky without anyone writing think pieces about it. Birthday parties still revolved around physical spaces instead of digital platforms, and the proof that you had fun was not a photo dump, but a handful of tickets, a plastic cup you took home, and the story you told at school on Monday. Later years would bring renovations, card-based game systems, replacing the satisfying clink of tokens, dance floors replacing stages, and eventually the quiet retirement of many animatronic shows in favor of screens and costumed appearances. Those changes made sense in a modern business context, but they altered the atmosphere. In the 1990s, the formula was intact. Pizza, tokens, music, and mechanical performers sharing the same stage, all working together like parts of an over-the-top, kid-centered machine. The charm of that era lies partly in its excess and partly in how sincerely it committed to being a place where childhood could run wild without apology. It was loud, bright, chaotic, and unapologetically artificial, yet it produced memories with surprising durability. Adults who visited as children often recall the smell of the carpet, a mix of warm cheese, soda syrup, and whatever mystery scent lived permanently in the play tubes. They remember the clatter of tokens in a paper cup, the way you could feel their weight and hear your own spending power rattle with every step. They remember the soft sting of static electricity when they slid out of plastic tunnels, the scratch of a party hat elastic under the chin, the moment of triumph when the ticket dispenser spit out a long ribbon like a jackpot. They remember staring up at the stage, trying to decide whether the characters were adorable or unsettling, and secretly loving that they couldn't quite choose. They remember negotiating trades with siblings, counting tickets with the seriousness of accountants, and realizing that a mountain of paper still only bought something small, which somehow made the prize feel even more earned. In an age before smartphones turned every spare moment into screen time, Chuck E. Cheese offered something wonderfully tangible. It was a place where time was measured not in minutes, but in games remaining, in slices left on the tray, in whether the last song on the stage show had played yet, and in how many tickets you could still carry without dropping them. Leaving always felt slightly too soon, not because the place was perfect, but because it was designed to make a kid believe the party could go on forever if only someone would buy one more cup of tokens.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 9 on X, we're here just for you.